I became the CEO of Aer Lingus because nobody wanted the job. And that's true. They had recruited somebody and offered somebody the job who then turned it down after what happened on 9/11, because it was clear to him that the airline was in deep, deep trouble. So he turned down the job. We had just a new chairman was appointed, Tom Mulcahy. So Tom rang me and said, look, we need a CEO and nobody wants the job. And I'm told that you're probably the best person internally. Will you be the CEO? So I said, yeah, no problem. And he said, for your benefit and for mine, he said, I'm going to put you through a formal interview process. But he said, nobody else wants the job. So I thought great. So I was asked to do these interviews. Now, you've got to remember, 9/11, I was the COO, 9/11, I was working straight through. I was working 20 hours a day. I can't remember, I worked from 9/11 all the way through the middle of January before I took a day off. So during that, while we were trying to put together what we call the survival plan, I was asked to do this interview with the subcommittee of the board of Aer Lingus. And that was a fascinating interview. I walk in the door. It was in Jury's Hotel in Dublin. I walk in the door, and I'm walking. I hadn't even sat down. And a guy called Paddy Wright, who was from Smurfit, was on the board of Aer Lingus. And as I'm walking to take my seat, he said to me, "Are you effing mad?" And I went, "What?" He said, why do you want this job? And I went into interview mode, and said, well, somebody needs to do it. I think I'm the right guy. But Tom felt that it would be useful if I had a discussion with the psychologist as well. That would. So I had this 3-hour interview with this psychologist, which started at 10 o'clock at night and went on until 1 o'clock in the morning. And then went to the board meeting. It was on the 18th of October, and that was the board meeting in which they appointed me as the CEO. First day was the 19th of October. It's a long story about that, but I won't bore you. But Tom had said to me, by the way, I want you to have a debriefing with the psychologist. And I said, yeah, Tom, don't worry, I'll do that. And he said, no, I think you need to do it sooner rather than later. So I said, okay. So he said, I've lined him up for today. So it's in your diary, 12:30, you're seeing the psychologist. So I sit down with this psychologist and he debriefs me. And he's, telling me about what he learned about me. And he stops and he said, you're taking this remarkably well. And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, normally, when I give feedback to people, there's always a little bit of tension and a bit of a pushback. He said, but, you seem to be just taking everything I say. And I said, but you're describing me. He said, yeah, he said, that's very unusual. And I said, yeah, but the problem here is I had the job. So I said, when I did this interview with you, I thought, what the hell? I may as well tell you what I'm like. So he thought, yeah, he said, that's fascinating. He said, that has never happened before. No, normally people try to sugarcoat it. But I said, no, you are describing me. And he said, well, you need to be aware of what you're like. And I said, oh, don't worry, I'm fine. But I actually did a very mean thing on my first day with the full management team of Aer Lingus. And you can talk to people who were there. I put them in this room that was too small for all the people. So think of this size of smaller team of people, but in a room that only fitted half of them. So they were really squashed in together. And the first thing I did is I said, guys, I've had a 3-hour session with a psychologist. Let me read you what he says about me. And I read out the profile that the psychologist had given me. And I could see people in the room going, oh, shit, what's... and some of the people who knew me really well said to me, that was either the biggest mistake you've ever made or the bravest thing you've ever done. And I'm, still unclear as to what it is. But my view was, we were in deep, deep trouble. And the message I wanted to give to people was, look, nobody's going to do this but us. So if we're going to fix Aer Lingus, it's going to have to be done by the people in the room. Some of them I knew well, some of them I didn't. And I felt, to be fair to them, they needed to know what I was like. And I thought no better way than to read them the profile that had been given me. When you're facing a crisis, the earlier you tackle it, the better. Because the earlier you tackle it, the more options you have. Where we got to in Aer Lingus is that, in effect, we were... So 19th of October, we estimated that we would run out of cash by the middle of February. And that if we didn't start doing something to generate cash, that was it. We were bankrupt. Now, we had no debt. As a company, it was fascinating. We had no debt. So the balance sheet looked fine, but we had no cash. And we had all of these unencumbered assets, aircraft, wide-body aircraft, A330 aircraft that we used cash to purchase because somebody thought it was a sensible thing to do at the time. But you couldn't get anybody to give you a loan on the back of an A330 because the airline industry had just gone into free fall. So we reckoned, middle of February, if we couldn't start generating a lot of cash, we were gone. So that forced us to do some, radical restructuring, and it meant, being pretty crude with how we went about restructuring the business. Now, as it turned out, the measures we took were sensible, and got us into a position where we bought ourselves some time and bought ourselves some cash, and enabled us to do a bit more finessing around the restructuring. But the initial part of it was brutal.
You fired 2,000 people?
Yeah, and many of them were my friends. It was very difficult. And one of the things I had to do as the CEO was stand in front of these people who I'd worked with for over 20 years, and to tell them that the future was very bleak unless a third of the people left the business, and that we didn't have a lot of money to pay them off, and we didn't have time for them to make up their minds. And the message I gave was, look, anybody who wants to leave is free to leave. I'm not going to stand in anybody's way. And we try to encourage people to leave the business. And over a third of the people in the end did leave. So we managed to do it. While it was brutal and painful for a lot of people.
There was a 3-day lockout, wasn't there? Didn't you?
Yeah, 3 or 4 days with the pilots. Yeah.
2002.
Yeah, it was during the World Cup.
That was high-risk strategy, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. Yeah. And I can remember doing interviews with the press because the pilots had threatened to go on strike, and they were going to do a 24-hour strike every 7 days. So I thought 24-hour strike every 7 days is going to kill us. It's just going to kill us because it's not 24 hours. It's sort of the day before, it's the day after. And by the time you recover, then you've got to start winding down for the next one. So, what was for them a 24-hour strike and relatively painless was going to cause chaos for us. So the day before the first strike, we called the press in and into the boardroom, and I said, if they go on strike, we're shutting the airline down, and we're not going to open again until they agree to our terms. And it was, I don't know if you remember, it was at the time Roy Keane was sent home from Saipan, and there were ads, or cartoons in the Irish Times, I still have them, with the analogy of, or the, liking me sending my pilots home, my captains home, and McCarthy sending Keane home. So this was high stakes stuff.